music, Bob Dylan's silence endured even longer than Bill Ochs's. They had become strangers after sharing a stage with similar beliefs. Dylan abruptly broke the quiet with a statement that shocked the whole music industry, burying that connection for decades as if it never happened. His admissions revealed a harsh reality about betrayal, loyalty, and reputation in the American folk movement. All music silver screen. After relocating to New York in 1962, Phil Ochs rose to prominence as one of the most well-known voices in Greenwich Village, where Bob Dylan was gaining significant traction in the folk music scene. At first, they both wanted to use protest music to bring about social change. Ochs pursued protest, but it was obviously political in nature. With songs like Blowing in the Wind, Dylan was also regarded as a spokesperson for the movement, inspiring a powerful surge of youthful anti-war demonstrators. Music. At this point, Ochs and Dylan's relationship was regarded as harmonious. Dylan recently told friends that Ochs was a man who truly grasped what folk music was fighting for at meetings at places like the Kettle of Fish. Together, the two played in front of thousands of people at festivals, most notably the Newport Folk Festival. They were regarded as representatives of the wave of American political folk music in the early 1960s, despite the fact that they did not formally cooperate on any musical works. However, the distinction between the two became evident as soon as Dylan started penning songs with more reflective and abstract hues. Music. Bob Dylan's songwriting direction clearly changed with the release of the album Another Side of Bob Dylan. Dylan turned his attention from songs that demanded action to intimate, occasionally evasive narratives. Ochs, meanwhile, stuck to a straightforward political theme. I Ain't Marching and Draft Dodger Rag are two examples. In addition to expressing Ochs's own opinions on injustice and war, Any More also reflected the social climate of the day. However, the similarities and variations in presentation led to a rising number of comparisons. According to a later interview, Ochs once said, "Bob is moving away from what we started. He's just writing about himself now." This was an early indication that Ochs no longer felt in tune with his former icon, while Dylan reportedly lost interest in the constraints that protest music brought. In 1964, Dylan released songs like My Back Pages with lyrics reflecting his maturing and breaking away from old patterns, which Ochs saw as a clear indication that Dylan had completely changed direction. He started to express his distance from artists who still adhered to the old framework, including Ochs. This shift was not just an artistic choice, but also a decision to break with a particular historical period. Many of his contemporaries felt left behind. In the same year, Ochs kept writing songs that emphasized the spirit of struggle, but Dylan no longer seemed to be interested in this. Dylan's artistic changes and philosophical disagreements opened the door for deeper personal conflicts, rifts, and eroding relationships. Bob Dylan started experimenting with electric sounds and straying from the conventional protest music structure in the mid-1960s. Dylan's rock-influenced songs, such as Like a Rolling Stone and Can You Please Crawl Out Your Window, were released during a time of significant artistic change that caused conflicting reactions in the folk music community. Dylan's refusal to engage with overtly political themes confused and infuriated many in the industry, including Phil Ochs. Dylan's decision to disassociate himself from social messaging was perceived by Phil Ochs as an act of abandoning musicians who were using music as a vehicle to represent reality. Ochs continued his protest style during this period, releasing songs with anti-war system critical material such as The War Is Over and Cops of the World. In addition to his disappointment, Ochs believed Dylan was purposefully undermining the role of those remaining in the political folk movement, and some of Dylan's remarks during these discussions irrevocably sowed the seeds of discord between the two men. Dylan once called political songs nonsense and argued that music should not be used as a vehicle for indoctrination. In response to these remarks, Ochs reacted angrily, saying in an interview that year, "He left behind what we started with." The most overt instance of tension was when Dylan and Ochs went to a peace concert together, and, after the show, Dylan played Ochs, his new recording of "Can You Please Crawl Out Your Window," and asked for his opinion while they were both in a limousine. Dylan's response was instantaneous. He commanded the driver to stop the car, turned around and told Ochs simply, "You're not a folk singer," to which Ochs answered that the song was fine, but nothing exceptional. He then asked Ochs to exit the vehicle, saying, "You're just a journalist." In addition to hurting Ochs, Dylan's cruel split left him feeling alone in the shifting world of art. In subsequent interviews, Ochs frequently talked about feeling abandoned by people who had once followed in his footsteps. Dylan rose to fame during this period, while Ochs was progressively forgotten by the public and media. In addition to being forced out of the mainstream, Ochs also encountered disinterest from the community that had once backed him when he was one of the leading voices of the anti-war movement. Ochs steadfastly upheld his position using music as a vehicle to convey political messages, even though it was no longer widely accepted. He started to be perceived as symbolizing an old, outdated era. The difference between the two career paths became more apparent as Dylan cultivated an image of an individual artist who was elusive and unattached to any movement. Ochs had been a friend, but as Dylan gained prominence, their relationship became unbalanced, and those close to him acknowledged that Ochs felt resentful not only due to ideological disagreements, but also because he felt betrayed. The conflict was not only ideological, but also reflected the changing power dynamics in the music industry. The long silence was interpreted by many in the folk world as Dylan's complete rejection of the relationship. But when it involved profound philosophical disagreements and a significant disparity in status, the rift became irreparable. Years later, when questioned about this time period, Dylan did not provide any clear explanations or recollections, and mostly avoided any questions pertaining to Ochs. After Phil Ochs and Bob Dylan ended their relationship, Ochs went through a protracted period of personal and professional decline. Indicators of trouble started to appear in the late 1960s when he experienced writer's block and was unable to write songs with the same impact as before. The rift, along with personal events, led to a period of tragedy and widespread silence, collapsed death, and unanswered words. Ochs responded by continuing to write political songs, but the pressure from the music industry and the community left him in a state of perpetual depression, and he started drinking excessively, losing control of his emotions during performances. New songwriting attempts failed to connect with the public as it shifted to new musical genres. During this time, Ochs felt he was being followed and bugged, and once told friends that the CIA was trying to ruin his career by stifling his career. According to relatives, Ochs was diagnosed with bipolar disorder by a doctor, but he refused to receive stable treatment. Colleagues described Ochs as having frequent mood swings from cheerful to angry in a matter of minutes. In some performances, Ochs refused to sing his old songs because he thought he had been killed, and that Train was just living on in his place. These expressions were no longer an artistic personality, but rather a blatant sign of psychological breakdown. Ochs's paranoia continued to the point where he created a new identity, John Butler Train, which he used frequently, including when performing in public. Gunfight at Carnegie Hall, where he performed songs like Crucifixion with a sardonic and bitter attitude, was the last piece that perfectly captured this mood. Although the song was officially about John F. Kennedy's death, many people read it as a response to the folk movement's collapse and a personal disappointment in Dylan, whom Ochs had previously accompanied. Despite attending the same events in 1974 and 1975, the relationship had soured. At the charity concert, An Evening with Salvador Allende, Dylan arrived without warning, and Ochs was the primary organizer. Both were present, but they did not speak to each other in public, and attendees remember Dylan being unfriendly and Ochs being quiet and aloof. At another occasion, Ochs appeared at the birthday celebration of Mike Porco, the proprietor of Gertis Folk City, the venue where Dylan had made his debut, and performed a cover of a Dylan song as a reminder that they had been friends and had begun there together. However, Dylan did not reply, and those who were with him conveyed their unease about Ochs's presence. Even though it was unspoken, the rejection was enough to make Ochs feel as though his last remaining faith had vanished. Phil Ochs was found hanged at his sister Sonny's house in Far Rockaway, New York, on April 9, 1976. Prior to that, he had been unemployed and had hardly interacted with anyone in the music industry. Documents discovered revealed that he still carried his old hospital certificate and psychiatric diagnosis. Those who knew Ochs as one of the most incisive anti-war writers were shocked by his death, but Bob Dylan did not reply, did not attend the memorial service, and did not send flowers. Although he left no suicide note, his prior actions indicated that he was prepared to end it. Did not send a message. Joan Baez, Pete Seeger, Dave Van, and many other well-known people who had performed with Dylan were present at the Carnegie Hall tribute concert, but Dylan was not present at all. When asked about Ochs in an interview with Music Magazine in 1978, Dylan merely responded, "I Ain't Marching Anymore is a great song." Throughout the 1980s and 1990s, Dylan avoided referring to Phil Ochs by name. There were no songs written in his honor, no public remarks made in performances or interviews, and no further sharing, contemplation, or expression of personal feelings. This was the first time Dylan had mentioned Ochs since his passing. Dylan listed many of the people who influenced him in Chronicles Volume 1, his memoir published in 2004. However, he did not mention Ochs by name. Phil Ochs was not mentioned in Martin Scorsese's documentary No Direction Home, which covered the folk movement and Dylan's most notable time period in great detail. However, as a close colleague, Ochs appeared to be left out of the narrative Dylan chose to tell. Dylan didn't appear to acknowledge Ochs's role in any way until the early 2110s, when he mentioned a difficult folk era in which many artists didn't survive at a press conference for his new album. Although he didn't specifically mention Ochs by name, those in the know knew he was referring to Ochs. Although it is not an apology, it is the first time Dylan has admitted that Ochs was not only a member of a movement, but also a representation of what was lost in the metamorphosis of a whole musical generation. Both individuals left behind a complicated musical and personal legacy that was influenced by contrast and distance, following years of tragedy and silence. Bob Dylan and Phil Ochs have two quite different legacy paths as a result of their divergent artistic choices. Dylan has progressively distanced himself from the role of spokesman for a movement, instead focusing on exploring inner depth and broadening the scope of songwriting beyond conventional molds, while Ochs is known for simple political songs that serve action and protest. Each line of lyrics was written with a specific purpose: to protest war, to condemn violence, to reclaim rights for the oppressed. Ochs is a member of a class of artists who believe in the power of a message. Songs like There But Fortune, Power and Glory are sung at protests, charity shows, and social gatherings across America. While Dylan swiftly moved away from the role of a singer for the audience to become a storyteller for himself, each of Ochs's songs was a political act. Dylan's metamorphosis led many folklore enthusiasts to view him as a traitor, but it was also the decision that ultimately allowed him to grow and endure. While Ochs was stuck in the role of a struggle singer, unable to find a place when the times changed, Dylan was able to continue to move forward with flexibility in his artistic thinking when the public grew weary of protest. He transitioned to rock, blues, country, and even Christian music for a while before returning to folk in his own way. Many people regret Ochs's passing, but it also served to highlight the importance of his legacy. In memorials and music conferences held since the year 2000, Ochs is frequently cited as one of the few individuals who persevered to the end, and his critiques of the entertainment industry, politics, and the military are still relevant today. Dylan's rejection of protest music has been inevitably compared to Ochs whenever the American political folk movement is discussed, so his silence for so long has been perceived as a means of avoiding the memory rather than confronting it. A number of subsequent artists, from Billy Bragg to Ani DeFranco, have acknowledged Ochs's influence on their approach to social music. Even though Dylan has started to bring up Ochs once more, it hasn't made much of a difference in how the public perceives their relationship. Dylan's claim that Ochs was a victim of his own ideals is a realistic portrayal of an artist who refused to adapt and change. Ochs lived by his own artistic principles but was also caught up in a cycle he couldn't break. As a result, his legacy is both tragic and deserving of respect. Unquestionably, Ochs has always been an unforgettable part of Dylan's journey, and in order to comprehend what laid the groundwork for that relationship, we must go back to the beginning, where it all started. Dylan's infrequent recognition of Ochs after decades of silence does not close the enormous gap that once existed. Born into a military family in 1940 in El Paso, Texas, Bill Ochs developed an early interest in social injustice, war, and current affairs. He switched from journalism to music at Ohio University, feeling that words could accomplish more than writing, and when he arrived in New York in the early 1960s, he immediately settled into the Greenwich Village folk music scene, which was developing as a hub of the counterculture. Born in Duluth, Minnesota, in 1941, Bob Dylan also traveled to New York at the same time. Originally hoping to meet his idol Woody Guthrie, Dylan quickly established himself as a major force, drawing the attention of record labels, journalists, and audiences with his distinctive songwriting and performing style. Before the folk movement peaked, Dylan decided to use symbolic imagery to tell his story, but Ochs wrote about domestic repression, war, and political assassinations, and his lyrics did not mince words. Songs like Talking Vietnam and Here's to the State of Mississippi put Ochs at the forefront of the protest music movement at the time. Despite their differences in songwriting, Ochs and Dylan first had a similar goal of using music to reflect social realities. They met at open houses, music workshops, and frequently performed together at important events. They are frequently included in a group of politically influential artists that also includes Joan Baez, Pete Seeger, and Tom Paxton. The years 1962-1964 were a time of active, if not deep, interaction between the two. Dylan is said to have praised Ochs in a coffee shop conversation, calling him a man with a sharper pen than most wartime journalists. Dylan saw Ochs as a man of strong ideals and unwavering faith, and critics have described this generation of musicians as having a movement spirit, both artistic and militant. However, underneath that admiration was a sense of imbalance, as Dylan was more well-known, more sought after by the media, and more heavily invested by record labels. In turn, Ochs acknowledged Dylan as a great inspiration, a trailblazer who helped folk transcend the boundaries of acoustic guitars and linear lyrics. Even though they both began from the same place, Ochs felt overshadowed, and this feeling smoldered and grew over time, especially when Dylan changed his creative direction and abandoned the protest style that was their common point. If you find this content interesting and want to keep following real stories, many layers of meaning, and many emotions, please like the video, share it with others who are interested, and don't forget to subscribe so you don't miss the next episodes. Thank you for joining us today, and please share your opinions about Ochs Dylan or any of the characters you'd like to learn more about in the comments section below.